Father, we thank you for this time to get together and just study your word and see what you've got to tell us. And we just pray that you'll be with us and with our church and just give us guidance and direction and to follow your ways. And all this we ask in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. We're still in chapter 22 of 1 Samuel. And we're going to be doing verse 6 through the end of the chapter. And I don't think it's any accident that the Bible is all, or a great deal of it, is man's relationships with man and God's relationships with man. And how he deals with not only his people and what they do in guiding them and directing them, but also how he deals with people that reject him and rebel against him and how he deals with those. And he also gives us a huge insight on human nature and personalities. And a good study of the Bible will teach you how to deal with almost anybody and any situation, because it is full of relationships and interactions between people and how bad people can be and how good they can be and how easy it is to not understand human nature and people's reactions to things. And that's what we see here. So David, let's back up to verse 5. But the prophet Gad said to David, "Do not stay in the stronghold. Go into the land of Judah." So David left and went to the forest in Harah. So David is back in close relationship with God. The chapters before this, what was David doing? He was lying to people. He was doing what he thought was best. He was going where he thought he should go, not where God thought he should go. And look what happens. Once he's back in fellowship with God, a prophet of God says, you need to leave and go to Judea. And that's what he did. He didn't ask, well, why are you telling me to go there? He just went. And that's obedience. He's coming back to his relationship and fellowship with God. So now, the rest of this chapter, a great deal of it, deals with Saul and his reaction to things. So, in verse 6 of chapter 22, now Saul heard that David and his men had been discovered. So, Saul has found out that David has been sighted. He knows David has 400 men with him and all that type of thing. So Saul's going to go into a conniving means of control. And you see this today in society, between people, between nations. Same thing. People haven't changed. So what he does here, it says, and Saul, spear in hand, was seated under the tamarisk tree on the hill at Gibeah with all his officials standing around him. So they're under this giant tree. Saul has got his leaders and commanders around him, and he's going to talk to them. And here's something, if I was in that group of men around him that would really bother me, what's he got in his hand? His spear. What does Saul do every time we see him with a spear in his hand?
Throws it at somebody.
He throws it at somebody. So if I was in this group of men that are circled around him, and he's got his spear in his hand, I'd be scared to death. I'd be a nervous wreck. I wouldn't hear anything said because I'd keep my eye on the spear. Because the 3 times we've seen him with it before, twice he tried to kill David, once he tried to kill his own son. So when he's got his spear in his hand, you better be careful. So that's the setting. So he tries to build loyalty, first of all, based on race. Check this out. He says, listen, men of Benjamin. Okay, what's he doing? He's from the tribe of Benjamin. All the leaders in his army are from the tribe of Benjamin. There's 12 tribes in the nation of Israel. And God considered them a nation that was supposed to work together. What's Saul doing? I'm a Benjaminite. All of you are Benjaminites. You need to be loyal to me because we're both of the same tribe. So right there, he's trying to divide the Benjaminites from the people of Judah. So right there is a conflict, and he makes that personal because he makes it between Jesse, the father of David, and his tribe was Judah, and with the Benjaminites. So he's using tribal loyalty, race loyalty, whatever you want to throw in here, as a means of honor and loyalty. You should be loyal to me for no other reason than I am from the tribe of Benjamin, and so are you. That will get you in trouble. You need to be open and deal with what's right and wrong, not base your loyalty and relationships on a person's race, creed, color, religion, that type of thing. So, that's what he does. So first of all, he's using that. Then he uses bribery to build loyalty. If you drop down, it says, listen, men of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give all of you fields and vineyards? Will he make all of you commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds? So what's he saying? I'm the king, I'm in charge, and I can give you land, wealth, I can give you power by leadership, and are you not going to be loyal to the person that can do all of that for you? You think that doesn't take place today? You think people aren't in powerful places because of who they know and how much money they got? Sure are. This was 4,000 years ago. Nothing's changed. Man's heart is evil, unless they have the person of Jesus Christ. And so that's the second thing he does. I can give you great wealth. And what did Samuel say at the beginning when they started wanting Saul to be king? Samuel reminded them. Remember when we talked about this? Samuel said, here's what a king should do. And here's what the king is going to do. The king is going to surround himself by people he wants. He's going to make them wealthy. He's going to take your land, your vineyards, and give them to his friends. And that's what's going to happen under this king. That's the way the book of Samuel starts out. This king is not God's chosen king. This king is doing what he wants to do. You remember the king was supposed to be a servant of two things? A servant of God and a servant of his kingdom and people. What's he done? He's not a servant of God, and he's not a servant of the people. And he's using his power for corruption and to keep people loyal. The only problem with paying people to be loyal is always somebody's got more money. And you see that all the time. This could get real political, but it's not going to. But anyway, you see things like that all the time, and that's what Saul's doing. And then, the last thing he's going to do here to build loyalty is to shame the people. Have you ever had somebody at work or in your employment or anything like that try to shame you into compliance? Sure you have. And that's what he does here. That's his third thing. He says, no one, so he starts this diatribe about how everybody's picking on him. He says, I give you all this stuff, and in verse 8 he says, is that why you have all conspired against me? No one tells me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is concerned about me or tells me that my son has incited my servant to lie and wait for me, and he does as he does today. So right there, he's shaming his leadership, why are you, I'm doing so much for you, why have you turned on me? First of all, they probably don't know half of what he's talking about. And everything he's saying here is not true. That's the other thing. Has David done anything to make Saul afraid of him? Nothing. Has David ever not been loyal to Saul up until the last time he tried to kill him? No, he hadn't. He even tried to get back in Saul's good graces after the first time he tried to kill him. So none of this is true that he's accusing David of. And so then he in the continued shaming, in verse 9, he has to rely on an Edomite, a person that's not even a Jew. That's who I've got to go to for help and support. So that really makes him feel bad. Verse 9, but Doeg the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's officials, said, I saw the son of Jesse come to Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, at Nob. Ahimelech inquired of the Lord for him. He also gave him provisions and the sword of Goliath the Philistine. So, this Edomite, remember in the previous chapter, when David saw him, he knew it was going to be trouble. Because he was going to need, David knew he was going to go back to Saul and tell him all kinds of tales. And so that's what happens here. So none of his men actually turn on David. And so once all of this comes out, and it makes it look like that the high priest is conniving against Saul, and that's not true. If you remember, David didn't even tell him what his plans were. So there's no way Ahimelech could have known what David was going to do. So anyway, once he gets all of this done, and he's planning his revenge the whole time this is going on. So the first part of his revenge begins to take place in verse 11. And verses 11 through 19 discuss his revenge. Excuse me. Then the king sent for the priest Ahimelech, son of Ahitub, and his father's whole family, who were the priests at Nob, and they all came to the king. So Saul says, all of y'all come and meet me here because I need to talk to you. So they show up, and this is a lot of people, as you're going to see as we go through this chapter. So a huge entourage comes from Nob to meet with Saul. So they're obeying the king. They're technically God's servants, God's ministers on earth. They're supposed to be the king's guidance in their relationship with God. So he calls them, and they all come. So once they get there, Saul said, listen now, son of Ahitub. Yes, my lord, he answered. So they're completely unaware of what's about to happen, and they say, yes, my lord. They're in obedience to the king, which is the way it should be. Because, biblically, you're supposed to obey those in authority over you. But we're also going to see here that there's times when you don't do that. And that's going to come up. So anyway, he starts off and he says to him in verse 13, Saul said to him, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, giving him bread and a sword and inquiring of God for him, so that he has rebelled against me and lies in wait for me as he does today? Okay. Yes, Ahimelech did give him Goliath's sword, and he gave him the showbread to eat. And so Saul takes this all negatively. But Ahimelech's going to give his defense. And all of these accusations that Saul's made are not true again. Is David lying in wait for Saul? running from Saul. Saul is lying in wait for David. So that's a huge difference in opinion there. So Ahimelech answers the king in verse 14, and here's his defense. Who of all your servants is as loyal as David, the king's son-in-law? So now he's going to explain his relationship. David's your son-in-law. He's the captain of your bodyguard. So at one time he was so trusted that he was basically, to use Roman terms, in charge of the Praetorian Guard. So this is extremely important. He not only was his son-in-law, he was also the commander of the guard that protected the king specifically. And everybody around David and everybody in Saul's kingdom liked David. And they thought a lot of him because of his loyalty and because of his relationship with God. He was well respected by everybody. The only person that didn't respect him is Saul. So anyway, that's his first defense. And then he says, was that day the first time I inquired of God for him? Of course not. Let not the king accuse your servant of any of his father's family, or your servants knows nothing about this whole affair. So first of all, was it unusual for the high priest to have David confide in him? No. He just said, I do this all the time. Why is this so unusual? What's been done wrong here? Anytime David comes, generally he comes to ask me, what does God have for me? What do I need to do to honor God? And this was a normal occurrence. So Saul's whole argument is falling apart. David's one of his most loyal people in his whole kingdom. David always went to the priest in most cases to see what the priest's will was that God had for him. So none of this makes any sense. But Saul is paranoid. Very paranoid. He's got in his head, whether it's through demonic possession or whatever, that David's out to kill him, everybody's against him, and I'm going to react to that by destroying these people. So the king says, you will surely die, and your father's whole family. Now that's a heck of a statement now. What kind of godly king would wipe out the entire priesthood of Israel? And that's what he's getting ready to do. And so then the king ordered the guards at his side, turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because they too have sided with David. Now, who would you rather side with? God or Saul? You see what's developing here? So he tells his army, kill all these priests. You got to remember, these are still Israelites. They still hold the priesthood in esteem. And probably some of them were still fairly faithful to God. We don't know how many. But we're going to see what happens. But the king's officials were not willing to raise a hand to strike the priests of the Lord. Rebellion. What have these men decided to do? We're not going to obey you. And here comes, and it's in the Bible in a lot of places, you obey the law. Because it's there for your protection. It's there to minister justice, as Jesse talked last week. But there comes a time when you have to make a choice. And that comes when man's law is directly in violation of God's law. That's when, and that's only when, you have a right to not obey the law. Now, how did they do that? Did they do it with violence? Did anybody in the New Testament, when they decided not to obey the law, do it violently? No. They just didn't do it. And whatever happened, happened, but that's the way it was. And it's throughout the Bible, there's a continuity of that idea. Let me see if I can find my notes here. Yeah, look at Exodus 1:17. Exodus 1:17. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" The midwives answered Pharaoh, "Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive." Did they tell a lie? Yes. But what did they do? They did not disobey God. Killing all these children just because the king said so doesn't make it right. And then, in the New Testament, flash forward, look at Acts 5:29. In Acts 5:29, Peter and the other apostles replied, "We must obey God rather than men. The God of our fathers raised Jesus from the dead, whom you have killed by hanging him on a tree." And he goes on and gives the reason that they're not going to obey man over God. And what did Jesus himself say? "Render unto Caesar's what is Caesar's, render unto me what is mine." When they handed that coin to Jesus, he asked them a question. He says, "Whose image and inscription is on this coin?" And they said Caesar's, but they didn't tell you what the inscription was. The inscription was, "Caesar, the God that we worship." That was the inscription. So not only was it a monetary issue for paying taxes, which Jesus had no problem with, give Caesar his taxes. Give me the honor as being God and not him. That's when you draw the line. And so that permeates the Bible for Christians, is you have an obligation to obey the law and do what it says, because the Bible also says it's there to protect you and protect those around you. But also, if it's flat wrong, then you have a legitimate right to not do what the law says. So the next move is the Edomite, Doeg. Saul says for him to kill him. Well, he does. And he would be more than happy to do this. Because remember, the Edomites and Israel were at war right now. Saul had attacked them. Why this guy was there, I don't really know. Might have been playing both sides of the fence. He might have been thinking, well, this is the guy I'm going to go with because it looks like he's going to win, so I'll stick with him. So I want to make him happy. So also, he probably hated the priest because he was probably a pagan worshiper. That wouldn't have changed. So what would give him more joy than to get rid of priests of the one true God and go on about pleasing Saul? So that's what he did. He chose to please man instead of God. And he is successful. He kills all of the priests. And you notice how many were there? That day, he killed 85 men who wore the linen ephod. He wiped out the entire priesthood in the nation of Israel, except for one. We'll talk about him in just a minute. So anyway, I can't believe that he did all this by himself, because he actually goes back to Nob and kills all the women, men, children, infants, everything. Wipes out the entire town. So he had to get help from somewhere. God could have given him that power, but I don't think he did. I think he had help there, but anyway, the key thing is he was an Edomite, and he was the one that was leading this massacre of not only the priesthood, but all their children, their wives. The town was decimated. They killed all the donkeys, cattle, and sheep, just wiped it off the face of the earth, basically. So that's what took place there. Now, when God says something, he means it. Look at 1 Samuel. Go back to chapter 2, verse 31. And I'll start in the middle. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me. Those who honor me I will honor, but those who despise me will be disdained. The time is coming when I will cut short your strength and the strength of your father's house. Now he's talking to Eli, the chief priest, who his children would always be priests and hold the chief priest power. So he says in verse 32, he says, and you will see distress in my dwelling. Although good will be done to Israel, in your family line there will never be an old man. Every one of you that I do not cut off from my altar will be spared only to blind your eyes with tears and to grieve your heart, and all your descendants will die in the prime of life. What just happened? That entire line of the priesthood has been destroyed. At the beginning of this chapter, we know what Eli did. At the beginning of this book, we know what Eli did and how corrupt his priesthood had become. And his two sons were selling favors with God. So, total corruption. God says, I'm going to take the priesthood away from your family. Not just you, not just your two sons, but there will never eventually be a priest from your line. And I will give that to a different Levitical tribe. Or not tribe, but line of descent. Now, so, like the New Testament says, don't count God's patience for slowness. He's going to do what he said he's going to do. He often gives people a lot of time to change, repent, come back to him. But eventually, there's judgment. And that's what took place here. Now, after all these people have been killed, one priest gets away. One. And it's Abiathar. He's the son of Ahimelech. And he escaped, in verse 20, and fled to David, to join David. He told David that Saul had killed the priest of the Lord. Then David said to him, that day when Doeg, the Edomite, was there, I knew he would be sure to tell Saul, I am responsible for the death of your father's whole family. So, and David took that upon himself, because why was David there where Doeg was? Because he wasn't following God's guidance. He went there on his own. So basically, in not following God, indirectly, David was responsible for all of those deaths. And he's sorry for them. But he tells him, he said, stay with me, don't be afraid. The man who is seeking your life is seeking mine also. You will be safe with me. Who's back? David's back. What's he afraid of? Nothing. Just like when he went out to get Goliath. Was he afraid of Goliath? No. Why? Because he knew God was with him and was in front of him, and he was going out before him. And so now we know David's back. The problem with David is the same problem that we have, same problem I have. I'm up and down in my relationship with God. And it doesn't work well. And so that's what's happened here. He's come back to God. His strength is back. His confidence is back. He's not afraid of anything anymore. He says, you're going to be safe with me. How could he make that statement unless he was sure God was with him, that he would be safe with him? Now, back up to Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech. So we've got one priest left that's a descendant of Eli. That doesn't fit with what I just said, does it? That Eli's descendants are all going to be wiped out and will never be a priest again. And Abiathar is going to be with David as his spiritual advisor. So he's going to have the prophet Gad and a priest. So his royal entourage is complete now. He's got a priest, he's got a prophet that advise him on God's will. And David's entire kingship, this man's going to be his priest. And he's even going to be Solomon's priest. That's going to transfer over. But look at what's going to happen. Look at 1 Kings. Look forward. The 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 26 and 27. And this is Solomon talking to Abiathar. To Abiathar, the priest, the king said, go back to your fields at Anathoth. You deserve to die, but I will not put you to death now, because you carried the ark of the sovereign Lord before my father David and shared all my father's hardship. So Solomon removed Abiathar from the priesthood of the Lord, fulfilling the word the Lord had spoken at Shiloh about the house of Eli. So even though this one priest was spared, and because he turned back to God, God honored him and allowed him, even though his whole family line had been corrupt, to be David's priest and priestly advisor for his entire kingdom. And he was very loyal to David. And even Solomon had him as a priest for the first part of his reign. But he turned against Solomon, which means he turned against God. And Solomon was kind enough to not kill him, but to let him live, but basically in exile, and he stripped of his priesthood. And that's the end of Eli's priesthood. And Solomon's going to have a new priest and a new priestly line from an entirely different generation of Levites. So, we'll stop there and